This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, War, Peace, and the Presidency. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. Vice President Kamala Harris makes her closing arguments to voters tonight at the Ellipse near the White House, where Donald Trump gave his speech on January 6, 2021, just before his supporters rioted at the Capitol. Trump made his closing argument Sunday at Madison Square Garden. As he did so, local Democratic Socialists protested nearby at Bryant Park. For more on Trump's closing arguments and the rise of the authoritarian right, we're joined by Ruth Ben-Ghiat, expert on fascism and authoritarianism. She's the author of Strongmen, Mussolini to the Present, and a professor of history and Italian studies at New York University. She also publishes the newsletter Lucid on threats to democracy. Professor, welcome back to Democracy Now! In these lead-up to this final week of the election, if you can talk about the comments of President Trump, everything from arresting his enemies to the enemy within, and what this echoes for you.
Yeah, so, fascism started almost 100 years ago in both Italy and Germany with a core of combatants from World War I who brought the war home and turned their wrath and their force and their violence on liberals, on leftists, on progressive priests, on anybody who was not in their leader cults. And so when Donald Trump talks about America being an occupied country that he's going to liberate, this is the language also of Franco. This is the language of fascism and violence. And, when we think about all the dehumanizing rhetoric and the explicit references to Hitler's Germany, Trump doesn't want people comparing him to Hitler, even sued CNN for $475 million, claiming they were comparing him to Hitler. But he himself his campaign has explicitly made these parallels, even releasing a campaign ad that talked about him creating a, quote, unified Reich, and of course calling people vermin. And I want to say something about the use of profanity and the crudeness of all of these remarks at the Madison Square Garden rally, which of course was the site of the American Nazi rally. Because we think about authoritarianism as imposing controls on people and silencing people, and it certainly does that. But it also is designed from fascism forward to make people become their worst selves, to give them permission to be as violent and unrestrained as possible. And so deregulation, just as, the Project 2025 wants to deregulate environmental protections and food safety things following what happened during the Trump presidency, there's also a deregulation of inhibitions of morals. And so that you will be not less bothered when the violence starts. You will turn the other cheek, or you will participate in it. And this kind of profanity, at women, the misogyny, anti-Black statements, the calling Latinos garbage. It's not only a tradition of dehumanization that starts with fascism and goes through authoritarian movements up to our day. It's also designed to make people feel, the foot soldiers of MAGA, that there are no restraints, there are no controls, and everything will be accepted as long as it is in the service of targeting the enemy within.
I wanted to go to two clips of Donald Trump, and these have become quite familiar. He called for the National Guard or U.S. military to be deployed on U.S. soil to target what he called radical left lunatics. Trump made the call, at least this particular one, he said it repeatedly during an interview on Fox News.
I think the bigger problem are the people from within. We have some very bad people. We have some sick people, radical left lunatics. And I think they're and it should be very easily handled by, if necessary, by National Guard, or if really necessary, by the military, because they can't let that happen.
And this is Donald Trump speaking in Aurora, Colorado, earlier this month.
It's the enemy from within, all the scum that we have to deal with that hate our country. That's a bigger enemy than China and Russia.
And of course, we know what John Kelly said, his former longest-lasting chief of staff, the general who called him the definition of a fascist. Your response, Professor Ben-Ghiat?
So, you know, retired military officers, especially generals, don't speak out unless they feel there's a real need to do so. And the fact we're seeing General Kelly, General Milley, former Defense Secretary Esper speak out and use the F word, calling Trump a fascist, means that you know, they are highly concerned about a possible misuse of the military. Because again, this goes back when Trump talks about scum and perhaps needing to use the military against them. This echoes, you know, Francisco Franco and the whole discourse of the subhuman, which was integral to fascism. But there's also a geopolitical dimension. It's very important because if you're Putin or Xi or North Korea, and you know, have your expansionist aspirations, the power and professionalism of the U.S. military is a huge problem. The global reach of the U.S. military is a huge problem. So here comes Donald Trump, who's the latest partner of Putin. There's been Gerhard Schroeder, Silvio Berlusconi, now we have Trump, who wants to give the U.S. military a new role, concentrating them on domestic repression, withdrawing from NATO, with calling troops back from abroad. And so we have to think about who benefits geopolitically from this rerouting of the military. I'm not saying the military would go along with this, but this is what Trump is saying by when he declares repeatedly, and as does J.D. Vance, that the bigger problem, you know, Russia and China are not the biggest problem, it's the enemy within. So this refocusing of military and armed force on American people benefits Putin, benefits Xi, benefits any autocrat who has expansionist ambitions.
That's right. Good.
I want to bring into this discussion Marshall Curry. Marshall Curry went to the Madison Square Garden event. But he also did an Oscar-nominated film. That film was called A Night at the Garden, about the 1939 Nazi rally at Madison Square Garden. This is a clip.
Ladies and gentlemen, fellow Americans, American patriots, I'm sure I do not come before you tonight as a complete stranger. You all have heard of me through the Jewish-controlled press as a creature with horns, a cloven hoof, and a long tail. We, with American ideals, demand that our government shall be returned to the American people who founded it.
If you ask what we are actively fighting for under our charter, first, a social just white Gentile ruled United States. Second, Gentile-controlled labor union, free from Jewish Moscow-directed domination.
A Night at the Garden. That was an excerpt not of Nazi Germany, but of a Nazi rally at Madison Square Garden in 1939 from the Academy Award-nominated short film directed by Marshall Curry. That voice, explain what we just saw and listened to, and the protester who came up and was beaten up.
Sure. So in 1939, there was a rally in Madison Square Garden where 20,000 New Yorkers gathered to celebrate the rise of Nazism. And when I first saw that footage, I was completely shocked to see the American flag and George Washington, and hear people singing the Star Spangled Banner and saying the Pledge of Allegiance, and then offering the stiff-armed salute and cheering white supremacy. So the man who was speaking was named Fritz Kuhn. He was the head of the German-American Bund, which had camps all around the country, had quite a big following and some significant power. The protester who runs out on stage and is beaten up was a man named Isidor Greenbaum, who was a Jewish plumber's assistant who just went to the rally that night to find out what was going on and was shocked and appalled by what he saw.
And you went to Madison Square Garden Sunday?
I did. So I made this film 7 years ago with out of archival material that we'd sort of found in the National Archive and UCLA's archive and Grinberg Archive. And that was, 7 years ago at the beginning of Trump's administration. I saw some similarities between some of the demagoguery that was happening on stage in 1939 and what Trump was doing at his rallies. And so, but I'd never actually seen a Trump rally personally. And so when I heard that he was going to be at Madison Square Garden, I thought I needed to go and see it for myself.
And Marshall Curry, as you mentioned, you're surprised. Many Americans are not aware of how extensive the fascist or Nazi movement was in the U.S. Back in those days. Could you talk about that?
Sure. I mean, when I grew up, I always learned in school that America took on the fascists and we fought the Nazis and defeated them, and we did, and that's a great point of pride for our country. But we were not entirely united. As today, there were people in our midst who were anti-Semites, who were anti-immigrant, and I think the thing that struck me the most about seeing that footage was the way that the demagogues in 1939 used the same tactics that we see today. They use this kind of dark humor. They wrap their ideology and the symbols of patriotism, and they go after immigrants and the press and minority religions, and they do it to distract people from the fact that they really want to cut taxes for rich people and take away health care and do policies that people wouldn't support.
And I'd like to ask Ruth Ben-Ghiat, this Madison Square rally has happened numerous times in U.S. history. People forget that in 1968, when George Wallace, the white supremacist governor, was running for president, he held a rally at Madison Square Garden in October of 1968, and it was filled as well with segregationists right here in New York City. And in fact, the police were picking up people in the streets, anyone who was trying to protest the Wallace rally. I know because I was a young college student at the time, trying to get down to Madison Square Garden, was picked up by the police blocks away from Madison Square Garden, and we were held in vans until after the rally was over, hundreds of people. The reality is that filling Madison Square Garden is really not that hard for a political movement. You're talking about less than a metropolitan area of 20 million people. Being able to get 20,000 zealots in an arena is basically 0.2% of 1% of the population.
Yes, and the other thing is that this rally, all the different strains of it, playing Dixie, this Trump rally, Trump has always provided a big tent from the very beginning, 2015, 16, for every possible kind of racist and extremist in America. He addressed himself to Southern racists, he addressed himself to Proud Boys, to neo-Nazis, famously at the Charlottesville rally, every type of person with a grievance, and then enlarged that with espousing great replacement theory. And of course, in partnership with Fox, with the GOP elite, et cetera. And so all of this was represented at this rally, together with people from the fields of business, like the businessman Grant Cardone, who said we have to slaughter these people, referring to people who aren't supporting Trump. And you had people from the world of entertainment and from sports. And so Madison Square Garden, a seat of spectacles and sports spectacles, entertainment spectacles, political spectacles, was the perfect place actually for MAGA to show how many people are fitting into its big tent of racism and extremism.